"You can't sit with us. Mommy said you're just a useless old freeloader." My 9-year-old granddaughter Lily said that in front of the entire family, right in the middle of my son Michael's birthday dinner. What hit me wasn't the insult itself, but the sound of my own child laughing at it. I stood up, trying to keep my back straight, even as my chest tightened like someone was squeezing it. No one apologized. No one stopped her. That night, Michael texted me a single sentence. "Mom, tomorrow is the usual payment deadline." And I replied, "Handle it yourself." They didn't know that, from that moment on, I had opened the door to the biggest reversal of their lives. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I'm 66 years old and live in a quiet little town in Oregon. My white wooden house with the wide front porch is where I raised my 2 boys and where I once imagined I would grow old peacefully, surrounded by the laughter of family. But it turns out everything I spent my whole life building could collapse in an instant created by the very people I loved most. That day was Michael's 41st birthday. The little blonde boy I once carried is now a grown man with a wife, a child, and a family I always thought I still belonged to. I had woken up at 6 a.m. to prepare the dinner. I roasted honey-glazed chicken, Michael's childhood favorite, made coleslaw, and baked a red velvet cake using the exact recipe he once said was the best in America. I cleaned every corner of my kitchen, polished the silverware, and laid out a navy blue tablecloth, his favorite color since high school. I poured my whole heart into that meal, not because I wanted gratitude, but because I loved my son, loved this family so much that I sometimes forgot I also deserved respect. At exactly 3 p.m., Michael and Vanessa's shiny black SUV pulled into my driveway. I smiled, my heart fluttering with a fragile hope that maybe today would feel warm, like the old days. But the first person to step out, Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, shattered that hope immediately. She lowered her sunglasses, scanned my house like she was assessing a free temporary shelter. "Oh, wow, you actually cleaned today," she said, her voice cold even though her lips curved into a polite smile. I simply replied, "I always keep the house clean. You just don't notice." Vanessa didn't care. She walked inside as if entering a convenience store, eyes glued to her phone, leaving Michael to carry everything. Lily, only 9, walked in last, shaking her brown curls and giving me a look no child should have, unless someone taught her to. I bent down and opened my arms. "Hi, Lily, sweetheart, come give Grandma a hug." She stepped back half a step, wrinkling her nose as if I had offered her something dirty. I swallowed that sharp, stinging feeling in my chest and stood up. "It's okay," I told myself. "Kids can be unpredictable." But I was wrong. I was naive to the point of foolishness. When we sat down at the table, Vanessa crossed her legs like a queen, not lifting a finger to help. Michael looked at his phone more than he looked at me. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware in my warm, quiet kitchen. I tried to start a conversation. "Lily, how's school? Grandma misses you." Without looking up, she replied, "Mommy says Grandma asks too many questions." I heard Vanessa chuckle, and Michael gave an awkward, embarrassed smile, but said nothing. He didn't correct his daughter. He didn't ask his wife to be respectful, not one word. When I brought out the red velvet cake, candles glowing on top, I hoped the atmosphere would soften. I thought the moment of blowing out candles might spark some warmth. I thought my son would look at me the way he used to, as the woman who tucked him into bed every night. I thought wrong again. Just as I sat down to join them in singing, Lily suddenly stood up, turned to me, and said clearly, "You can't sit with us. Mommy said you're just a useless old freeloader." The cake nearly slipped from my hands. Vanessa burst out laughing. But what tore me apart was Michael's quiet laugh, the one I would hear again in my sleep for nights afterward. The room spun. I stood up slowly so I wouldn't collapse. "Good," I told myself. "Don't cry in front of them. Don't let them see you hurt." I walked into the kitchen. Before the door even swung shut, I heard them go right back to laughing, talking, as if they hadn't just shattered someone's heart in the same room. I leaned against the sink, my hands gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. On the wall, there was a photo of Michael at 4 years old, smiling brightly in his little beach outfit. I stared at that picture and wondered when my son had become a stranger. That night, after everyone left, I cleaned each plate smeared with frosting, each glass with their fingerprints on it. My house went quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes an older woman feel alone. My phone buzzed. Michael. "Mom, tomorrow is the usual payment deadline." The usual payment, meaning the money I had quietly wired into his account every month for 3 years, so he could keep up appearances with Vanessa, so his family never lacked anything, so Lily could attend private school, so Vanessa could carry a new designer handbag every season. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed 3 words, "Handle it yourself." And for the first time in 15 years as a single mother, I felt peaceful. Not because I saw my future, but because I finally saw theirs. I, Evelyn Brooks, had lived my whole life for my children. I once believed that's what a mother must do, but that birthday dinner woke me up. Love is not meant to be stepped on. I turned off the living room lights and walked up the creaky stairs to my bedroom. Each step echoed softly like the sound of a chapter closing. No one knew that as I sat by my window looking out at my winter garden, I was already thinking one thing: if they see me as a burden, then let's see how long they last without that burden. And I made a silent promise to myself. They would have to relearn their entire lives from the very lesson they began with ungratefulness. I didn't know that night that this small decision would trigger a domino effect, shaking the entire family, toppling illusions, revealing truths even I never expected. But I knew one thing for certain. That day was the day I stopped being dismissed and started reclaiming my life. The next morning, I woke just as the first light hit the pine trees behind my yard. I still heard Lily calling me a freeloader in my head, but strangely, the sting had hardened into something like a thin sheet of ice, cold but strong, protective. I put on my sweater, went downstairs, brewed my black coffee, and sat at my usual spot by the window, the place where every morning I watched the world move slowly. But that morning, the world didn't move slowly at all. My phone buzzed nonstop, tearing right through the quiet. I knew who it was, but I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 5th call, I finally answered. Michael's voice exploded through the line, shaky and frantic. "Mom, why is my account negative? The bank says I'm short almost $3,000. Vanessa's car won't take gas. Her card got declined. Mom, what's happening?" I took a sip of coffee, watching the steam drift across the window. "Oh, are you sure you called the right person? I'm just the useless old freeloader." "What do I have to do with this?" Michael went silent. I heard his breathing quicken. Then, from somewhere behind him, a sharp shout. "Michael, you said your mom put money on my card. They declined it. I had to leave my coffee." It was Vanessa, sharp, shrill, panicked. I smiled faintly. I had never been this calm. "You heard her," I said gently. "A burden has no financial obligations." "Mom, this isn't funny. The house payment is due. Bills are piling up." "Oh, the house?" I interrupted. "The one I paid 80% of the down payment for?" A gulp. Footsteps. Maybe he was walking to a quieter corner. "Mom, what are you saying? You paid for us?" I walked to my wooden cabinet, took out a red folder, and set it on the table. "Michael, do you know what I've been paying for these past 3 years?" I pulled out each document, reading them like a grocery list. The mortgage, the cars, insurance, Lily's private school tuition, both of your credit cards, roof repairs, summer camp, your Colorado trip last year. The line went dead silent. "I did all that because I love you, because I didn't want Vanessa to look down on you, but I see now I was completely wrong." Michael stammered. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything? Why should I? You're a grown man, Michael. You have a family, responsibilities. I thought helping a little would give you confidence." I paused. Turns out I only fed a habit. Just then, Vanessa grabbed the phone. "Lily is just a kid. She didn't mean it. Why are you blowing this up?" I laughed, a short, sharp laugh. Kids repeat what they hear. Children don't come up with insults for their grandmothers on their own. Vanessa went silent immediately. I continued. "Do you know why Lily spoke that way, Vanessa? Because she heard it at home, because you said it, because Michael didn't correct you. I don't blame Lily, but I will not tolerate the disrespect of adults." Michael's voice returned, desperate. "Mom, the bank is really going to take the house. I need you to—" "No, Michael." This time, my voice was stone. "Yesterday, you watched your daughter insult me. You laughed. When a mother is treated that way, no one has the right to ask her for anything." I heard him choke, a small, broken sound. I placed the papers down and flipped to the printed statements. "These are all the payments I made. You can come see them any time, but listen carefully. From today on, I'm not paying a single cent more. You and Vanessa have 24 hours to do one simple thing: apologize, properly. If not, all support ends, permanently." On the other end, I heard Vanessa cry, not in remorse, but in fear of losing her lifestyle. Michael sounded like the weight of the sky had fallen on him. "Mom, you can't do this. I can't fix this on my own." "Michael," I said softly yet firmly, "I fixed everything my whole life. Now it's your turn." I paused, letting the next words land. "If you see me as a burden, then you must learn to live without that burden." A long silence followed, then a slammed door. A yell, Michael calling after her. I breathed in slowly. My kitchen glowed with soft morning light. My coffee was still warm. For the first time, I felt free. My pain hadn't vanished, but it had hardened into resolve, into steel. For 3 years, I supported a family that never thanked me. I protected Michael's pride. I let them build an image of me as an endless resource. That ended this morning. I set down my cup and closed the folder. Sometimes, to stand firm, an older woman doesn't need anyone behind her. She just needs to say enough. And that morning, for the first time in 66 years, I did. Michael called 2 more times, but I didn't answer. They needed time to face themselves, to understand that everything in life has a price, including a mother's kindness. And in that silence, something became incredibly clear. I owed them nothing, but they owed me an apology I would never forget if it didn't come. I clicked the folder shut, a soft, decisive sound, like a door closing, and another one, opening. A door leading to a confrontation they never imagined I had the strength to walk into. I didn't have to wait long. Just before noon the next day, the sound of a car slamming its brakes echoed across my yard, sharp and dry like a warning. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out the window. Michael stepped out of the driver's seat, exhausted, his clothes wrinkled, his hair flat and oily like someone who hadn't slept all night. But Vanessa was different. She stomped her high heels on the tile steps of my porch, pushed open my front door without even knocking, as if this place belonged to her. "We need to talk," Vanessa said, her voice sharp as a thin blade. Michael stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. I didn't invite them to sit right away. I wanted to see how they intended to begin this conversation, but clearly, apology wasn't in their vocabulary. Vanessa crossed her arms, tilted her head with challenge. "You cut off the money without warning. That's unreasonable. I want to know why." I raised an eyebrow, swallowing a sigh. "Why? You two don't see the reason." Michael awkwardly sat down on the sofa, while Vanessa remained standing as if she needed the higher position to protect her crumbling ego. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "we really need you to explain. Suddenly all the payments stopped. I can't handle—" I cut him off. "You said suddenly? Michael, you don't remember what happened last night?" Vanessa let out a mocking laugh. "If you did this to prove you have power, it didn't work. We're not scared." I looked straight at her. "Oh, then who's handling the frozen credit cards? Who's paying this month's mortgage? Lily's tuition that's waiting for a signature? Your SUV running out of gas on the road? Who's filling the tank?" The confidence on Vanessa's face cracked. She shot Michael a look as if blaming him. I quietly pulled the red folder from the dining table and placed it in front of them. A solid thump filled the room. "Good. Let me help you explain." I opened the folder. On the table were detailed statements of every expense from the past 3 years. Receipts, bank transfers, tuition bills, car insurance, home repairs, even the receipt for the leather jacket Vanessa bragged about on Instagram. I pushed a stack of papers toward them. "From the milk Lily drinks every week to your Colorado trip, all of it. I paid." Michael reached out with shaking hands to pick up a sheet. Vanessa froze in place, her skin turning visibly pale. She tried to force a weak smile. "This must be some misunderstanding. Michael never said you paid." "Yes," I said evenly, because Michael was ashamed. "My son has been lying to you for 3 years. Michael quickly shook his head, then dropped his hands, as if he no longer had the strength to deny it. "Vanessa, I didn't have a choice. I just wanted you to think I was capable. I was afraid if you knew—" "What does that mean?" Vanessa burst out, turning to me. "Lily is just a kid. She talks nonsense. Don't use a child's words to make things difficult for us." I leaned back in my chair, watching her for a long moment. Children repeat what adults teach. She didn't come up with the phrase, "useless old freeloader," on her own. You might forget that kids hear more than adults think. Vanessa went silent. Her face shifted into an odd shade of red, part anger, part shame, part fear. I took a soft breath and said clearly, "You two said you needed to talk, so do I. First, bring Lily in here." Immediately, Vanessa reacted as if touched on an open wound. "No, she's not involved. She's sitting in the car. Whatever you want to say it to us." I knew exactly what she was afraid of, that her daughter's own words would expose the attitude she had been hiding. "Vanessa," I said, my voice light but sharp, "a child only repeats how their parents treat others. If we don't talk to Lily now, she'll grow up thinking it's normal to insult her grandparents." She clenched her teeth. "I'm not letting you brainwash my daughter." Michael raised a hand as if to calm both sides. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have stayed quiet. No, Michael." I looked straight at my son. "You didn't just laugh. You allowed all of it. You let your daughter believe cruelty is acceptable. You taught her that through your silence." Michael lowered his head, his shoulders collapsing as if years of weight had fallen onto him all at once. Vanessa crossed her arms and lifted her chin. "Fine. If you want us to apologize to get the money back, we're not doing it. We can handle things ourselves. We don't need your charity." "Oh?" I tilted my head, unable to hide my smile. "Handle things? Vanessa, do you know how much is left in Michael's account right now? $37. Your credit card is 2 cycles overdue. Your car loan has the highest interest rate tier. The bank is about to send a second foreclosure notice. How exactly do you plan to handle this?" Her face flamed red. "We'll manage. I can get a better job. I'm not dependent on anyone." I looked directly into her proud eyes and said softly, "Vanessa, you've been dependent on me for 3 years without knowing it. And the worst part is, you thought you were above everyone else." Michael rubbed his forehead, his voice breaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I wanted to look strong, to be the provider. I didn't think it would turn into this. I just wanted Vanessa to be proud of me." I placed one hand on the table, staying silent for a few seconds before speaking. "If you want respect, you must live like someone worthy of it. You can't build love on my money." I pushed the folder toward them. "Now here is my final choice. 24 hours. Either you apologize to me, clearly, sincerely, without excuses, or you two handle everything on your own starting today." Vanessa shot to her feet. "I don't need that kind of money. I will take care of my family. I won't let you control us." She grabbed Michael's hand. "Let's go. We'll show her we don't rely on anyone." But her steps trembled, and Michael looked like a rope pulled from both ends, between his wife's pride and the truth he couldn't outrun. When the door slammed shut, my house fell silent. Only the wind rustled through the trees outside. I sat down, resting my hands in my lap, letting my breath settle. No more hurt, no more humiliation, just one strange feeling, the feeling of someone who had restored order. I knew Vanessa wouldn't let go of her pride easily, and Michael was sinking into the dark space between shame and fear of losing everything. But I also knew one certain thing. This storm was only beginning. Some winds can only be understood when they rip the roof off someone's house. And for Michael and Vanessa, that roof had never been more fragile. That afternoon, as the sunlight fell behind the pine trees, my phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't Michael's frantic calls. On the screen was a name that softened something inside me. Jonathan. My younger son living in Seattle, almost a 4-hour flight away. Jonathan had always been the grounded one. Quiet but thoughtful, and most importantly, he had always treated me with the kind of kindness that didn't need to be shown off. I answered, "Mom?" His voice was low, touched with concern. "What happened with Michael? He called me past midnight, crying. I've never heard him like that." I closed my eyes and exhaled. I had prepared myself to retell the story, but hearing Jonathan ask with genuine care made the ache inside me stir again, like a wound brushed too soon. "Do you want to hear both sides or the truth?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "I always want the truth from you." So I told him. Everything. From Lily's insult, Michael's laugh, the entire family walking away without realizing how deeply they had cut me. I told him about the usual payment text, about Vanessa barging into my house as if I owed them answers. I told him how neither of them apologized, only demanded to know why I had unreasonably cut the money. Silence stretched across the line. Then Jonathan spoke, slow and measured. "Mom, I really don't know what to say. I had no idea Lily said that. But what Michael did, I'm so disappointed." His voice tightened. "I don't blame you for cutting support. Honestly, I think you should have done it a long time ago." I gave a faint, sad smile. "I know, but I always thought Michael needed time, needed the feeling of being supported to stand tall." "That's not what happened, Mom," Jonathan said immediately. "He relied on you to maintain an image for his wife. He relied on you to build a life he didn't earn. It's not support anymore. It's dependency." I went still. Hearing my own son say it plainly made me face a truth I had avoided for years. Jonathan continued, "To be honest, Michael needs this shock to grow up, and you need the distance so you're not taken advantage of anymore." That sentence was like a light turning on inside me. "Jonathan, if Michael calls to borrow money, what would you do?" I asked, partly curious, partly needing to know if I could trust at least one son completely. Without a second thought, Jonathan replied, "I won't give him any. Doing that would just enable him, and I won't be part of hurting you more." Maybe I had been waiting years to hear someone in my family say that. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the front yard, where the first yellow leaves of the season had begun to fall. "Thank you," I said softly, "not because you're taking my side, but because you see something I took too long to see." Jonathan's voice gentled. "Mom, you never asked for anything except respect. If someone can't give you that, they don't deserve your help." A warm wave swept through my chest. "If Michael needs emotional support, I'll still be here," I said. "But no more financial help, no more carrying everything while they sit back." Jonathan exhaled, as if releasing something he had been holding. "I support you completely. And, Mom, don't soften your heart again. You've been through enough." I let out a light laugh. "You're afraid I'll soften?" "Mom," Jonathan chuckled, "for the past 30 years, you've never understood the meaning of the word harsh. But sometimes, setting boundaries is the healthiest way to love." I stayed quiet, not because I was hurt, but because my son had just spoken straight into a part of me I didn't know anyone understood. "Don't worry," I said. "This time, I'm not stepping back." After I hung up, I sat for a long time, listening to the ticking clock in the living room. For the first time in days, I didn't feel alone in this battle. At least one of my sons was truly grown, balanced, thoughtful, and capable of love that didn't bleed others dry. I began rethinking everything. The years I spent trying to shield Michael, not realizing I was weakening him. I realized this family didn't just need a small wake-up call. They needed an upheaval, and cutting financial support was only the first stone dropped into the water. That evening, after a simple dinner of chicken soup and toasted bread, I went upstairs and opened the wooden cabinet my late husband left behind. Inside were old folders, business plans from 20 years ago, documents I had intended to organize many times but couldn't because the memories felt too heavy. I pulled out each folder: savings accounts, shares of the small real estate company my husband and I started when Michael was just out of college, papers I had never shown either of my sons because I had wanted them to stand on their own feet. But now I needed to review everything, not to help Michael or Vanessa, but to prepare the next step for myself. I sorted through each sheet, placing them back in order, feeling as though I was reorganizing my life. a life I had let others steer for far too long. When the night breeze drifted in through the window, rustling the curtains, I paused and looked out at the small forest behind my house, and I understood. For the first time in years, I was reclaiming control. Not control over anyone else, but control over my own life. Something age often tricks people into believing they've lost. I closed the last folder and rested my hand on its cover. I could feel it clearly. I was stepping into a new chapter, not with a broken heart, but with strength forged from the very wounds that once cut me. Because sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who unintentionally give us the greatest gift, awakening. The next morning, a little after 8 a.m., I received a video call from Michael. But before I could pick up, the call ended. Not even 10 seconds later, my phone rang again. I knew this pattern. This was how my son called when he was truly panicking. I pressed accept. Michael's face appeared on the screen, gaunt, eyes red as if he had been crying or hadn't slept all night. "Mom!" His voice broke. "Vanessa, she left." I didn't act surprised. I set my tea down, kept my voice steady. "Tell me more clearly." Michael swallowed hard, as if his throat were filled with gravel. "Vanessa found out my real salary." He let out a strained laugh, a painful, defeated sound. "Turns out I only make enough to cover electricity, water, and some groceries. The moment you stopped helping, everything fell apart." I stayed quiet, not out of judgment, but because I wanted him to see his own reality with his own eyes. Michael continued, his voice trembling. "She said straight to my face, she didn't get married to live with a failure." Those words stabbed into my ears, even though they weren't aimed at me. I knew that kind of pain, when someone you once trusted sees you as less than your true worth. I sighed softly. "Where is Vanessa now?" "She packed her things last night, took her whole wardrobe, makeup, even the travel suitcase, then pulled Lily along. They're staying at her parents' house." His voice cracked. "Lily? She cried, but Vanessa said it was temporary. Until I can prove I can provide." I closed my eyes, feeling my heart squeezed gently by an old, tired hand. Loving your child is instinct, but love doesn't mean rescuing. Michael collapsed into a chair, hands on his head. "Mom, I lost my family." It was probably the first time in my life I had seen my son so bare. No pride, no bravado, no illusions of success. Just a 42-year-old man standing in the ruins he played a part in building. I kept my tone calm, but never cold. "Michael, sometimes the truth itself will choose who deserves to stay." He looked up, eyes pleading for someone to pull him out of the hole he had fallen into. "What do you mean, Mom?" I said slowly, "the people who stay when you have nothing are the people who are truly your family." Michael went silent for a long time. His breathing blended into the hum of the ceiling fan behind him. Then he spoke, voice breaking like a defeated child. "All this time, I really thought Vanessa loved me." "You were mistaken," I replied gently, but without avoiding the truth. "Vanessa loved the lifestyle she thought you had." Michael clenched his fists, lips trembling. "I created that illusion so I wouldn't be looked down on, so I could keep my family together." I looked straight into his eyes, not to scold, but to show him what I had seen long before he did. "You can't keep a family together with borrowed money or the money I sent in secret. All you did was delay the moment they saw who you really are." Those words made Michael drop his gaze, his shoulders shaking. I didn't step forward to comfort him. I knew he had to go through this moment, had to feel the full weight of loss if he ever wanted to stand back up. After a long pause, he whispered, "Mom, all of this happened because I depended on you for too long, didn't it?" I pressed my lips together. "Yes. But it wasn't just you. Part of it was my fault, too. I tried to shield you too much, afraid you would stumble." He looked up, confused and wounded. "Mom, but that ends now," I said firmly. "From now on, you have to live your life. If there are mistakes to fix, you fix them with your own two hands." Michael froze like a statue. That afternoon, I received another message from him. "Mom, the house has nothing. I've never paid a full month of bills myself. The electric bill, the internet bill, the Honda that needed gas using Vanessa's card, which was now frozen, Lily needing lunch money for school, the fridge containing only a carton of milk that had expired 2 days ago." I read each line, and my heart tightened. But instead of rushing in to save him, I replied with one sentence. "This is the first time you're living according to your real income. Consider it your starting point." 10 minutes later, Michael called again. "Mom, I'm so scared." I answered with the low, steady voice of a woman who had lived long enough to understand pain and strength. "Fear isn't shameful. Avoiding responsibility is." On the other end, Michael exhaled heavily. I'll try. I don't want to be the person Vanessa described." "Then prove the opposite," I said. "Start by paying your own bills." I heard him flipping through messy papers. "Mom, there are too many. I don't know which ones to prioritize. Electricity, water, food. If you can't pay the mortgage on time, call the bank and negotiate. Everything else, cut back. You don't need to live like before anymore." Michael was silent for a long moment before asking, voice small like a child waking from a nightmare, "Mom, will Vanessa come back?" I answered truthfully, without adding false hope. "If she loves you, she will. If she loves money, she won't." There are sentences that help people survive pain by touching the deepest part of it. That was one of them. That night, Michael sent the first screenshot of a bill he had paid himself. On the screen were the words, "Payment successful." For the first time in years, my son had done it on his own. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling as if I were watching a child take his first steps after refusing to walk for years. I only replied briefly, "Good job." No coddling, no exaggerated praise. Michael needed to learn that independence was normal, not a heroic achievement to be rewarded. In the following days, I watched his life from a distance. A house once full of noise now stood quiet. No more clicking heels from Vanessa. No more expensive perfume lingering in the hallway. No more Lily arguing with friends on the brand new iPad I had once financed. In that emptiness, I saw my son truly growing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. I understood one thing clearly. Breaking the dependencies I had accidentally created over the past 3 years would not be easy, but it had to be done. And the collapse of Michael's marriage was simply the inevitable consequence. Vanessa never loved Michael. She loved the income she believed he had. She loved the new car I bought. She loved the big house I paid for. She loved the generosity she assumed came from her husband. Now everything was exposed. Now the truth stood between them like a mirror no one could avoid. And I would no longer interfere. Sometimes being a mother isn't about catching your child. Sometimes being a mother means letting your son fall, so he learns how to stand on his own trembling legs. That weekend, Michael came to my house no longer in total collapse. He still looked tired, but there was a spark of life in his eyes. as if he had finally taken a full breath after years of suffocating himself. "Mom," he began as I poured tea, "I think you're right. Maybe I've never really grown up." I looked at my son, truly looked at him, for the first time without the mask he always wore. No pretending to be strong, no chasing an image of success he had invented. I gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "You're beginning now, Michael, and I'm proud of you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to face yourself." He lowered his head. "I'll do my best." I smiled. "Then this is only the first chapter of your new life." I invited Michael over on a quiet Sunday morning. Outside, red maple leaves dropped one by one, sounding like soft whispers of autumn. I stood in the kitchen making coffee, feeling an unusual calm. I knew the conversation about to happen would change the course of my son's life, and it was also a key step in the plan I had been quietly preparing for days. When Michael arrived, he knocked very gently as if afraid to disturb me, a hesitance I rarely saw in him. "Mom, I'm here," he said as he stepped inside, hands in his pockets, walking like a man who had just come out of a storm. I pointed to the old wooden table near the window, where I had placed a green folder, clipped with a bright brass fastener. "Sit down, Michael. I have something to give you." He looked at the folder as if it were a foreign object. "What is it, Mom?" "Open it." Michael slowly unfastened the clip. His eyes moved across the first page, then suddenly widened as if someone had pulled his hair. "Contract of employment, Brooks and Avery Real Estate Group." He looked up, mouth slightly open but unable to speak. I nodded. "That is your father's and my company." Michael froze. "But Dad was just a lumber mill worker?" I saw the innocence in his question. The truth was, my husband and I had hidden that secret well for 2 decades, not to deceive our children, but to protect them from growing up dependent on family wealth. "Your father worked at the mill until 2003, I explained slowly. "After that, he quit and focused on Brooks and Avery. We bought inexpensive lots during the recession, renovated old houses, rented them out, resold them, and kept building." Michael inhaled deeply, trying to process what he had just heard. I never knew." "That's right," I said, "because your father wanted you and Jonathan to build your own lives, not rely on inherited money, and I believed in that too." I rotated the folder toward him so he could see clearly. "You're 42 now. It's time you knew the truth." Michael looked down at the second page, a job description, Regional Property Manager, Western Division. Starting salary, a 6-figure number I knew he had never imagined. "Mom, why would you trust me with this, after everything I just put you through?" His voice shook, tangled with regret and disbelief. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at my son, a man walking into midlife with mistakes piled high like mountains, yet with a faint flicker of something still alive in his eyes, like a small ember refusing to die. "Michael," I finally said, "I'm not giving you this opportunity because you deserve it now, but because I believe you can become someone who deserves it later." He lowered his head, overwhelmed. "Mom, I don't even know how to thank you." But I lifted my hand to stop him. "This opportunity comes with a condition." Michael tensed. "What condition?" I folded my hands. On the table, my voice firm. "Vanessa is not to know." A deep silence sank into the room. Michael blinked, clearly stunned. "She can't know? But why?" I looked straight into his eyes. "Because I want to know the truth. I want to know whether your wife is with you because she loves you, or because she loves the lifestyle you pretended to have. If Vanessa comes back thinking you only earn your old salary, you will know how real her feelings are." Michael sat still like a statue. Then he reluctantly nodded. "Mom, I understand. Good. This is a test for both of you, yourself and your wife, and I will not interfere." I pulled another sheet of paper from the folder and pushed it toward him. "This contract clearly states your responsibilities, your benefits, and the termination clause if you fail to perform." Michael read through it, then straightened his back like someone who had just regained a long-lost sense of pride. "If I don't do well," he began. "Then there will be no second chance," I continued. "I already told you. This is your last opportunity." Michael drew a long breath, lowering his head, his eyes filled with a rare determination. "Mom, I won't disappoint you again." I looked at my son and felt as if time were looping. I saw my husband's shadow behind him, the man who always believed Michael had great potential, only he had never stepped off the safety chair others placed beneath him. Perhaps if he were still alive, he would have given our son this chance too. Michael stood up, holding the folder to his chest like he was carrying a priceless gift. His voice softened, but was filled with gratitude. "Mom, thank you for still believing in me, even when I don't believe in myself." I smiled gently, though inside me was an ocean of emotion. From now on, let your actions answer everything. I will no longer hold you up. Build your own life, Michael. He nodded, firmer than ever before. I watched him as he walked toward the door, his shoulders still heavy, but his steps carrying the strength of a man who finally understood his responsibility. When the door closed softly behind him, I stood up, walked to the window, and watched his figure disappear behind the maple trees. A cold breeze swept past, lifting a few yellow leaves into the air. I knew clearly I had just set the key gear of my plan into the correct position. Michael would grow up, Vanessa would show her true nature, and my family, after years tangled like a ball of yarn, would finally reveal who truly belonged to one another. I whispered to myself, a small promise to the husband I lost. He's about to step into a new chapter, Richard. This time he has to stand on his own 2 feet. Michael left my house with determined eyes, but I knew another battlefield awaited him. Not the new job, but the confrontation with his own marriage. I didn't interfere. I simply sat by the window, watching his silhouette fade behind the trees, my fingers tightening around the cooling cup of tea. A mother must sometimes step back to see clearly who walks out of her child's life, and who clings on only for personal gain. By late afternoon, as the sky shifted into deep blue, Michael texted me, "I'm going to Vanessa's parents' house. I want to tell them about the job." I replied with just one sentence, "Tell the truth." From what Michael later described, I could picture the scene inside Vanessa's parents' grand home, a suburban mansion where everything appeared more glamorous than it truly was. Vanessa had always bragged about her stable background, using it as a shield to belittle my family. Michael stood in the large foyer. Vanessa sat cross-legged on the sofa, her phone vibrating nonstop with social media notifications. She looked up, and the moment she saw Michael, she frowned. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa's voice was sharp as a blade. Michael took a deep breath. "I have news about my job." Vanessa immediately sat upright. "A new job? Good, tell me. How much is the salary?" Not how is the job, not are you doing okay, just how much is the salary? Michael said that in that moment he realized this question had repeated itself for 10 years of marriage. He had simply never heard it clearly before. "I was appointed regional manager. The salary." He swallowed. The starting salary is... How much? Vanessa cut him off, her voice harsh like someone gasping for air. It's an amount enough for us to live comfortably, not rich but stable. Say the number. Michael finally had to read the figure aloud, a relatively high salary for any middle-class man. But when Vanessa heard it, she shot up as if someone had slapped her. Not enough! Her scream echoed from the living room to the backyard. Michael froze. Vanessa, this is my real salary. It's a job I have to work hard for. Not enough for me to live, she yelled. Lily has always gone to private school. I'm used to designer brands. I'm used to weekend spas and dining out. You think that amount is enough? Michael said that at that moment he felt something inside him crack, something that had been fragile for years. Vanessa. He searched for words, but his mouth was dry as sand. We can adjust. Adjust? She laughed coldly. Adjust to live like poor people? What can you do besides drag me down? Lily was sitting in the corner with her doll, her big blue eyes wide. The 9-year-old didn't understand why her mother was so angry. She just looked between her parents with a confusion that could break any heart. Michael said that in his daughter's eyes, he saw something he had never seen before. Fear. Mommy, did Daddy do something wrong? Lily asked softly. Vanessa waved her off irritably. Be quiet, the adults are talking. Michael felt his heart plunge into a deep pit. Vanessa, you can't talk like this in front of her. You think I care? She snapped. You have no money, that's it. I didn't get married to be the wife of a failure. That sentence was like a hammer smashing every illusion Michael had clung to. He said that in that moment, he saw their entire 10-year marriage play back like a slow-motion reel. The cold nights when she barely spoke to him, the dinners where she never asked how much he had earned, the vacations she bragged about to her friends. Michael pays for everything. Michael didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't fight back. He simply watched his wife finish packing the last 2 bags, then pull Lily to her feet. We're going to my parents for a while. Vanessa said it like announcing the weather. When you can prove your worth, I'll talk to you again. Then she walked out, leaving the door closing behind her like a final punctuation mark. That night, Michael called me, his voice drained. Mom, you were right. Vanessa, she doesn't love me. A long silence. She only loves the life she thought was mine. I didn't speak immediately. I let him sit with the silence, the kind that speaks louder than advice. Finally, I asked, how do you feel? I feel empty. His voice trembled. But I also feel like I'm finally seeing the real path in front of me. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. Michael, sometimes the person who hurts you the most is the one who teaches you the most important lesson. Vanessa just showed you the truth you avoided for years. I walked to the window where the soft amber streetlights glowed against the sidewalk. From now on, you don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to play the role of a successful man just to keep a marriage that was never real. Michael's voice broke. Mom, I don't understand how you can stay so calm. I let out a small laugh because I already knew the outcome and because I've been watching from a distance. What do you mean? I mean, my son, the storm with Vanessa is only beginning. She still doesn't know what I know. Michael went silent. He didn't know what I was referring to, and I wasn't planning to tell him yet. I answered lightly, like a soft breeze with the sharpness of a thin blade. Because you are learning to face the truth, and Vanessa is about to face hers. Meaning I am letting the wind blow in the right direction. I heard Michael let out a long breath, But this time, it wasn't the sound of defeat. It was the sound of a man stepping out of the shadow he had created himself. When the call ended, I stood before the mirror and looked at my face, lined with wrinkles, filled with stories, shaped by storms I had survived. I smiled. At last, every piece of my plan was moving into place. I was never someone who sought conflict, but I never allowed anyone, not even a daughter-in-law, to diminish my dignity. If Vanessa believed I would rescue her again, she was wrong, because this time I wasn't carrying anyone's burden. This time I was only directing the wind and letting the storm put every person exactly where they belonged. In the days after the confrontation between Michael and Vanessa, I kept my routine, waking early, brewing a cup of black coffee, and sitting by the window overlooking the small forest behind my house. But my heart no longer felt heavy. Once you see the true nature of things, your mind becomes strangely clear. I knew Vanessa would soon face the consequences she chose, and I knew I was ready for the next step. Not out of revenge, but out of fairness. And to give my son a lesson he would never forget. I called Brenda, my personal attorney for 18 years, a woman so sharp she could predict an opponent's next 3 moves just by reading a single line of a report. "Brenda," I said, "I need you to investigate someone's finances. His name is Derek Monroe." Brenda paused for a second, longer than usual. "Vanessa's father, correct? Any particular reason?" "I want to know the real picture of that family," I replied, as clearly as possible. Brenda asked no further questions. We had worked together long enough to understand that the things I didn't say were the ones that mattered. 3 days later, exactly at 7 p.m., the time Brenda always sent important reports, my phone lit up with a PDF file over 100 pages long. I opened it and read line by line, item by item, number by number, until my heart grew still. Derek Monroe's convenience store chain was drowning in debt, unpaid employee wages, unpaid suppliers, unpaid taxes, and most importantly, placed under expanded investigation by the IRS. Brenda added a short note, "Evelyn, he may face prison in 6 to 9 months." I sat in my chair for a long time, not out of shock, but because every missing puzzle piece had finally come together. Vanessa always bragged about how successful her father was, but it turned out her entire family lived off a thin coat of outward glamour, one that was now peeling away. They were no better than Michael at this moment, perhaps even worse. The next morning, I sent the entire file to Vanessa anonymously, a short email, no signature, with only one sentence. "The truth is not always what it appears to be." I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Brenda texted me, "Vanessa just contacted another lawyer. She's panicking now." I smiled, not out of satisfaction, just the feeling that everything was unfolding according to its own logic. No one can use money to look down on others, especially when that money does not actually exist. 2 days later, while I was watering the plants in the yard, a shiny black SUV stopped at my gate. I looked from a distance and immediately recognized the man stepping out, an expensive gray suit, a slightly crooked tie, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. Derek Monroe. He, the one who once looked down on me at Michael's birthday party, the one who said, "Michael's family should learn to strive harder," the one who called me an unemployed old woman living off her son. Today he stood outside my gate, his hands clasped tightly together. I let him wait 4 minutes, not for revenge, but so he would understand that today courtesy was something he needed to relearn from the beginning. When I walked out to open the gate, Derek immediately bowed his head. "Mrs. Evelyn, please give me a few minutes." His voice trembled, completely different from his former arrogance. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone calm. Derek took a deep breath. I'm asking you to help Michael and Vanessa reconcile. My daughter, she's falling apart. Everything happened too fast. I know she hasn't behaved properly, but please, give them a chance." I folded my arms, leaning lightly against the gate. "You came to ask me that? After everything your family has said to me all this time?" Derek bit his lip, lowering his head even further. "I know. I was wrong. I misjudged you. But now is not the time to talk about the past. I just hope you can open your heart a little." "Open my heart?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. An interesting phrase, especially coming from someone who's in trouble with the IRS. Derek turned pale. Clearly he understood that I knew the truth. I didn't come here to argue." He tried to remain composed. "I came to beg. Vanessa will collapse if her marriage falls apart, and Lily as well." I let the silence stretch. Silence is what makes people reveal the truth. Finally, I said, "All right, I'll sit down and talk, but the rules are set by me." Derek looked at me, his expression mixed with relief and fear. "Thank you. I appreciate it." I neither nodded nor smiled. I simply turned, opening the gate just enough. "Go home and rest. When I'm ready, I'll contact you." Derek nodded repeatedly, then hurried back to his car, as if standing in front of me was a weight too heavy for him to bear any longer. When the SUV left the neighborhood, I stood in the yard watching the maple leaves swirl in the autumn wind. Some people think retaliation means causing immediate pain, but I'm different. I don't need to do anything. I just need to let the truth reveal itself. And the truth now was very clear. Vanessa's family was not wealthy, not stable, not powerful. They were collapsing under the shiny facade they had built. Vanessa thought Michael was the burden, but now she knows. Her own family is the bottomless pit. I walked back into the house and closed the door, feeling the wind shifting. Not too strong, not too fast, but unmistakable. Vanessa's storm was only beginning, and I, the one who had once been, dismissed, insulted, pushed away from my own son's dinner table, was now the one directing the wind, choosing the direction and the timing. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling the steady, quiet rhythm of someone who had lived through many years of hurt and finally understood that true strength is not in shouting. It lies in clarity, in knowing how to wait, and in knowing exactly when to push a door, so that the entire room behind it collapses on its own. I gave a thin smile, almost invisible in the fading light. "Vanessa," I whispered, not with malice, but like a prediction. "You've only made it through the first round." I chose a late weekend afternoon to take the next step, not for revenge, but to restore the order this family had lost. The golden light of the day slanted through the living room window, casting a long shadow on the wooden floor. I stood there, glancing at the clock, my heart calm in a way that felt unusual. Exactly at 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Vanessa standing on the porch. Her clothes were far simpler than before, her hair tied back hastily, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Beside her was Lily, wearing a pink backpack, holding tightly to her mother's arm. No trace remained of the prideful woman who once looked down on me. A cold wind swept past, fluttering the hem of Vanessa's shirt. We're here," Vanessa said softly, barely daring to meet my eyes. I stepped aside, offering space. "Come in, we need to talk." Lily walked in first. The moment she saw me, she stopped, bowed deeply, and said in a trembling voice, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that on Daddy's birthday. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Her voice broke, her eyes shimmering with tears. I stood still for a few seconds, letting myself feel the sincerity. This time, I knew the apology wasn't forced. Children have strong intuition. When a family falls apart, they sense who truly loves them. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. Grandma knows. You were just influenced by adults. What matters is that now you know what's right. Lily rushed into my arms. A small hug, but enough to soften the heart of a woman who had survived many storms. Vanessa watched, her hands twisting together, her thumb rubbing her wedding ring until her skin turned white. She sat down, her shoulders slumped like someone who had lost her balance. She tried to speak, but the words came out like they were dragged over gravel. I'm sorry for what Lily said and for what I said to Michael. I sat across from her, my hand wrapped around a warm teacup. Are you sorry because you feel guilty or because you're desperate? The question made Vanessa freeze. 2 seconds of silence felt like a full minute. I saw her throat tighten as she swallowed. Both, she finally said, but I don't want my family to fall apart. I looked straight into her eyes, now void of all sharpness. Then we're going to reset the rules. I opened the folder on the table. Inside were 4 pages of documents Brenda had drafted with full clauses. This is the agreement between me, Michael, and you. I said each word clearly. 4 conditions. If you agree, I'll support your family's chance to reconcile. If not, you're on your own. Vanessa swallowed. I'm listening. I took a deep breath, then began. First, Michael must be financially independent. You may not control, demand, or require access to his paycheck. Vanessa's eyes widened. I don't control, but if he can't, I raised my hand to stop her. You need to learn to live within your real means. She bit her lip but nodded. Second, you will work part-time at my company, a basic position, basic pay, no special privileges. Vanessa shot up from her seat, nearly shouting, "You want me to work for you?" "No," I answered calmly. "I want you to relearn the value of labor. If you accept, I will pay you fairly. If not, you're free to find work elsewhere." Vanessa trembled with anger, but she didn't argue. Desperation has a way of teaching silence. Third, Lily must apologize publicly before the family. Lily looked up, worried. I stroked her hair. "Not to embarrass you, to teach you responsibility even as a child." Lily nodded hard. "I'll do it. I'll say sorry to Daddy in front of everyone." I smiled at her, a smile I rarely gave to adults. "Fourth," I said, turning to Vanessa, "you must also apologize publicly. No excuses, no deflecting, no blaming everything on Michael." Vanessa's face drained of color like I had asked her to step off a cliff. "You want me to humiliate myself in front of the family?" "No," I replied. "I want you to learn humility, and I want Michael to see that you are truly changing, not because of money." The air grew heavy. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room, reminding Vanessa that her time was running out. Finally, Vanessa's hands dropped, and she sank back into the chair. "I agree." Her voice was as soft as the wind. I agree to everything." I didn't show triumph. I simply turned to the last page of the folder. "This is a binding contract. There are penalties if you break any of the 4 conditions." I placed the pen in front of her. Vanessa stared at it for a long time, her hand shaking so badly the cap clicked against the table. She signed, slowly, each stroke seeming to pull the air out of her chest. Once she finished, Lily ran to me, wrapping her little arms around my waist. "Grandma, I'm really sorry. I love Grandma." I bent down to hug her back. It was a hug I hadn't known I needed. I looked at Vanessa. "You know, I don't hate you. I never did. I only hated how you treated my son. But today, you have a chance to change. And so do I." Vanessa lowered, her hair falling forward to hide half her face. I'll do it right. I promise." Promise. A simple word, but when spoken by someone who had lived pridefully her whole life, it weighed more than metal. I stood up, gathered the documents, and said, "Get ready. We're going to hold a family gathering. There, everyone will hear the sincere apologies, and they will witness our changes." Vanessa looked up, anxious. "When?" "Saturday evening." "That's so soon. You'll manage," I cut in, "because that is when the real test begins." I glanced at Lily, who was still holding her mother's hand. This family has a chance to heal, but it must start the right way. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, placing my hand on the wooden counter, feeling each grain the same way I felt the journey I had walked. In my heart, a quiet thought rose. The queen had fallen, but a family can rebuild if they learn to bow at the right time. I knew the public battle still lay ahead, but I was ready. And this time, I would be the one redefining the word family. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. All day long, I was busy preparing the garden, hanging strands of warm yellow lights along the wooden fence, setting up an extra long table with a white cloth, placing hydrangea vases I had bought at the morning farmer's market. I wanted the space warm enough for emotions to be expressed without anyone feeling judged. By 7 p.m., the lights were on and the whole garden glowed with a soft, summer-gathering kind of warmth. But no one was comfortable. The atmosphere was tight as a stretched string. Michael's siblings were there. Jonathan had flown in from Seattle, standing beside me like a quiet anchor. Vanessa's family also came, looking awkward and guarded. Her mother pulled her coat tight around her, and her father, Derek, stood still, his face heavy as stone. I watched everything in silence. Then Lily stepped out. She wore the light blue dress I gave her last year. Her small hands were clenched, her lips trembling, but her eyes, those eyes shone with the courage of a child who had gone through more upheaval than any little girl should. I gave her a small nod, and she nodded back. Lily took a deep breath, then turned toward the whole family. I'm sorry for what I said at Daddy's birthday." Her voice shook like a thread pulled too tight. "I said Grandma was a freeloader, but I didn't understand. I just repeated Mommy's words. I was wrong, really wrong." Her voice tightened. "Grandma, I'm truly sorry." The whole garden went silent, quiet enough to hear the wind move through the maple leaves. Then Lily burst into tears, a clear, piercing cry, painful but not shameful, the cry of a child beginning to understand responsibility. I walked over and held her. "Grandma forgives you, and Grandma is proud of you." Suddenly, behind us, the family began to clap, not loud applause. Soft, small, but sincere. I saw Michael's eyes turn red. Jonathan touched my shoulder gently. Even Vanessa's mother bowed her head. But everyone's attention shifted when Vanessa stepped forward. I had never seen her like this. No glossy nails, no elegant silk dress. Vanessa stood there in an old sweater and simple jeans, her face unable to hide exhaustion. She walked toward me slowly, like someone carrying the weight of an entire world. Then, before anyone could react, Vanessa sank to her knees. A wave of whispers rippled across the yard. Her parents froze. Michael was stunned, and I stood still, looking straight at her. Vanessa's voice came out hoarse and slow, each word dragged from the deepest part of her humiliation. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the years I was ungrateful, disrespectful, and hurtful to you. I'm sorry I let my eyes be blinded by money and pride. I'm sorry for treating Michael like a burden." Her shoulders shook as if they might break. "I know. I've done so much wrong. I want to make things right. I want to be a better mother to Lily and a grateful wife to Michael. Please, forgive me." I heard someone inhale sharply behind me. Clearly her parents had never imagined seeing their daughter kneel before anyone, let alone before me. The shame on their faces said everything. I let the silence stretch. Then I leaned down and placed my hand on her shoulder. "Stand up." She looked up, eyes red and wet. "I will accept this apology," I said, "if it comes with action. Words aren't enough. But today, I see a different Vanessa." I helped her rise. Once she was standing, Michael stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. She grabbed his hand like someone trying to reclaim a support she had lost long ago. Michael turned to me. His eyes were warm, a warmth like being reborn, as if his heart, buried for years under pressure, shame, and forced strength, had finally found air again. "Mom," his voice cracked, "thank you." I didn't answer, but I knew. Everything was moving in the right direction. The gathering continued, but it was completely different now. No more avoidance. No more condescending looks from Vanessa's family. No more invisible wall between the two sides of the family. Jonathan chatted with Derek, for the first time without stiffness. Lily ran around the yard, her laughter ringing like the sound of hope. Vanessa helped me serve the food, her hands still trembling a bit, but her eyes calmer than before. As she set a tray of tartlets on the table, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," I replied, "for having the courage to change." At the end of the night, when everyone had left, I stood alone in the garden, watching the strands of yellow lights flicker like the house's gentle breathing. I felt something in the air that I hadn't seen in my family for a long time: warmth, respect, gratitude. But what made me happiest wasn't the apologies or the hugs. It was what was quietly beginning to grow. A lesson about self-respect, a lesson about responsibility, a lesson about the true value of a family. I looked up at the night sky where a few scattered stars were glowing. In that moment, I thought of my husband, the one who had gone before me, the one who once believed our family would find its way back someday. I whispered softly, "Richard, do you see it? Everything is finding its place again. You'd be proud of us." And I knew. Tonight, a new chapter of my family had begun. 3 months passed so quickly that sometimes I had to ask myself whether everything that happened was real or just a long dream. A dream where all the broken pieces were gathered and rearranged into something new, not perfect, but stronger. The change came from the smallest things, and those small things slowly pulled my entire family in a new direction. Michael called me almost every night not to ask for money, but to share his work updates with the quiet pride of a man standing steadily for the first time on his own ability. "Mom, today I closed the duplex in Tacoma." "Mom," my supervisor praised how well I handled the Western Division. "Mom, this month, I paid every bill myself." I sat at the kitchen table listening to him, my heart light as early season wind. No more desperate clinging, no more shame, no more slumped shoulders waiting for rescue. Michael, the son who once lived inside a shell of pride and fear of failure, was truly growing up at 42. I silently knew my husband Richard would be smiling with pride. and Vanessa. If someone had told me 3 months ago that my daughter-in-law could become a woman who listens, who thanks, and who corrects herself, I would never have believed it. But I saw it with my own eyes, little by little. She came to my company on time every day, even if it was only a part-time customer service job. In the first days, her hands shook when customers complained, but just weeks later I saw her guiding new clients, her eyes no longer arrogant but calm and patient. One afternoon, Vanessa walked into my office while I was reviewing the quarterly report. "Mom," she hesitated, "thank you because of this job. I feel useful." I looked at her for a moment. Her face had less makeup, but it was more beautiful because of its honesty. "You did it yourself," I said. "All I did was push a door open." Vanessa gave a soft laugh, her eyes a bit red but full of a gratitude I had never seen in her. Lily was the biggest surprise of all. She came to my house every weekend bringing a pink apron with a cat on it that she insisted on wearing in the kitchen. She learned how to slice carrots, whisk eggs, and season salt with the kind of careful seriousness that was almost funny. But what touched me most was the sentence she said almost every week. "Grandma, I love being here. I feel peaceful." A 9-year-old saying peaceful with such sincerity is rare. I knew she could feel the difference in how I treated her. No pressure, no scolding, no tension. Just quiet air, the soft sound of chopping vegetables, the smell of baked goods mixing with peppermint tea. And I realized I needed those moments with Lily more than I thought. As for Derek Monroe, Vanessa's father, the truth finally caught up to him. News of the IRS expanding its investigation spread quickly among the small business community in his area. 2 stores had to temporarily close. Another was sued by a supplier for unpaid invoices. Derek, who once held his head high in front of me, now quietly texted Vanessa, "Evelyn's son and daughter-in-law are the only ones helping us keep any shred of dignity." And then, one rainy afternoon, Vanessa came to my house, her eyes still swollen. "Mom," she said, "if you hadn't investigated and sent the documents early, we don't know what would have happened to my family. Thank you for saving us." I didn't take credit. I simply placed my hand over hers. "Whether I saved you or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you learned what you needed to learn." Vanessa lowered her head. "Yes." In those 3 months, I realized something precious. I no longer felt used. No one came knocking to ask for money. No one said disrespectful or belittling things to me. No one dumped responsibility on my shoulders and walked away. They came to ask my opinion, for guidance, to share small joys, big worries, or simply to sit in the kitchen and listen to me brew tea. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was in the right place. Not the family's bottomless wallet, but the head of the family, the steady center, the one who brought experience and calm. Jonathan was the first to notice. On his most recent visit, he looked around the house, saw my children talking together, saw Vanessa clearing plates, saw Lily grinning as she placed spoons into dessert bowls, then turned to me. "Mom," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you did something most people can't. You brought the whole family back on track." I laughed. "Jonathan, I just did what needed to be done." But he shook his head. "No, you did more. I'm proud of you." My heart warmed as if someone had wrapped a soft wool scarf around me in winter. Then one morning, while I was watering the tomato trellis, I suddenly realized something simple but important. My life was finally peaceful. No more quiet sobs in my bedroom out of hurt. No more silent disappointment when opening messages filled with demands. No more feeling like a burden. I had learned to love myself before loving the people I cared for. And when I did that, my family learned to do the same. Finally, I sat down on the wooden chair in the backyard, watching sunlight filter through the leaves, listening to Lily's laughter drifting out from the kitchen. Michael was showing Vanessa how to cook the pasta dish he had just learned from a coworker. Jonathan was on his way, saying he would bring an apple pie. I wondered. In all the years I spent struggling and trying to hold everything together, had I ever imagined I would see this? A family that isn't perfect, but knows how to love the right way. A family that knows how to apologize, how to correct itself, how to rise again. A family where I no longer have to endure, but can actually enjoy. I leaned my head back slightly, closed my eyes, and said softly, "Richard, everything is finally okay." And I knew this wasn't just 3 months that changed their lives. It was 3 months that changed me. There were afternoons when I sat alone on the porch, watching the golden sunlight spill across the grass like a warm blanket stretching to the end of the yard. In that quiet, I often thought about the journey of the past few months, a journey that started from a humiliating birthday party, from a sentence spoken by a child I loved, and from the laughter of my own son. Just one moment that seemed meaningless, yet enough to open an entirely new door. I thought about the version of myself that day, standing silent in the middle of the laughter, chest tight as if being squeezed, heart so empty it felt numb. And I also thought about the me of now, calm, strong, understanding my own worth more clearly than ever. I, Evelyn Brooks, am no longer the old freeloader in anyone's eyes, not because they changed what they called me, but because I changed myself. Looking back on the past 3 months, I understood something I never had the courage to face before. Sometimes, if we want others to grow, we have to let them hit bottom. We have to let them see the bare truth they've been avoiding. Michael needed to see his own weakness in order to stand on his own feet. Vanessa needed to lose what she thought was secure to understand the real value of family. Lily needed to learn that responsibility begins with even the smallest words. And I needed to learn to stop sacrificing unconditionally, because when you give too much without setting boundaries, love becomes a burden. And kindness, without limits, becomes a bridge for others to walk across without ever looking back. Now my family has changed. Not perfect, not always harmonious, but there is respect. There is listening. There is gratitude, something I once thought I would never receive from my own flesh and blood. Michael works hard every day, and sometimes just seeing him step out of his car with confidence makes my heart feel as light as the wind. He is no longer someone who only knows how to take, but a man who helps, who makes up for the past, who apologizes, and who repairs what is broken. Vanessa has learned the greatest lesson of her life, that a strong woman is not someone who demands, but someone who stands up after she falls. I don't need her to be perfect. I only need to see that she is genuinely trying, and I have seen that. And Lily. Every weekend, her laughter in my kitchen is the sound that makes my house feel young again, as if life itself wanted to give me a second chance to guide a child through love rather than through exhausting sacrifice. I look at my family and realize I am no longer pushed to the side. I am the keeper of the flame, the one who reminds them to be kind, the one who teaches them gratitude, something the younger generation often forgets. These days, the late years of my life have become wonderfully light. I have time to cook the dishes I enjoy, read books in the morning sun, tend to the lavender bushes in my yard, and listen to my children's and grandchildren's little stories without swallowing any hidden pain. No one knocks on my door asking for money. No one sees me as an obligation. No one forgets my presence. They come because they want me there, not because they need something from me. And for a mother, that is the greatest gift. I tell this story not to boast and not to blame anyone. I tell it because I know there are so many people out there like me, mothers, grandmothers, older women who are dismissed, overlooked, treated as old, unnecessary, or a burden. I want them to know no one has the right to treat you as something worthless, no matter who they are. Not your husband, not your child, not your daughter-in-law or son-in-law. If I, a 66-year-old woman who spent a lifetime sacrificing, can stand up and reclaim my voice, then you can too. You deserve love with boundaries. You deserve respect. You deserve to be heard. If my family can change, then yours can too. And now, as the story closes, I have only one thing left to say. If I could do it, you can do it. And I hope to hear your own story. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the final line of this story. I truly appreciate your presence, whether you're watching from the United States, Vietnam, or anywhere in the world. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment that woke you up the way mine did? If you enjoy stories like this, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next ones. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Don't sign anything. If you still want to see the kids. I was standing in the kitchen, my hand lightly shaking as I held the phone, listening to my daughter's voice, the daughter who had disappeared from my life more than 15 years ago. Say those words as if I were a stranger. That sentence didn't just stop me in my tracks. It forced me to face a question I had avoided for half my life, whether what I had been doing for the past 16 years was truly protection or just holding on. Families sometimes don't fall apart because of great evils, but because of small things left unattended for too long. I used to believe that as long as I stayed, as long as I didn't leave like others did, everything would somehow be okay. But if even staying can cause harm, then where is the line? I asked myself that question right there in my old kitchen, where the smell of morning coffee still lingered in the air. And then I understood. This didn't start with today's phone call. It started in a winter long ago, when I had just turned 51. If you're listening to this story from some city out there, leave me a comment and let me know. And if you've ever witnessed or lived through fragile boundaries in a family, tap like so this story can reach more people. I also want to be clear about something from the very beginning, before going any further. The story I'm telling isn't meant to confirm any objective truth, and it certainly isn't meant to judge right or wrong. It's been pieced together and edited from life experiences, looked back on through my own memories and personal feelings. Memory, as you know, isn't always perfect. I'm telling this to reflect, not to judge, and definitely not to encourage anyone to follow any of the choices in this story. That year, I had been retired for a few months. My name is Maggie Holloway, a widow living in a small Midwestern town where winters are long and so quiet you can almost hear the snow settling on the windowsill. My husband died young from a stroke. My children were grown, each living their own lives somewhere else. The two-bedroom house suddenly felt far too large for one person. In those first months of retirement, I tried to fill my days with small routines. Waking early to make coffee, walking around the neighborhood, reading the print newspaper like I had done for 30 years while working. If I had to describe my life back then in one word, it would be calm. Until one December afternoon when Laura appeared at my front door. She didn't knock hard or urgently. When I opened the door, Laura stood there with two children, a boy and a girl bundled in thick scarves. She looked thinner than I remembered, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion you see in someone who's traveled a very long way without rest. "Mom," Laura said, her voice quick and low, "I just need you to help me for a little while. Just a few weeks. I need to get myself together." I didn't ask, get together what? And I didn't ask how long a few weeks really meant. I simply opened the door wider, a reflex left over from when she was still a child. The two kids stepped inside, their shoes covered in snow, their hands gripping each other tightly. They didn't cry or speak, just looked around my living room as if trying to memorize a strange place. Laura set a small duffel bag beside the couch and handed me a set of keys. "I'll call," she said. "I promise I'll call." No paperwork, no agreement, no clear promise beyond a few weeks. Just the cold keys in my hand and a vague unease creeping up my spine. But I didn't stop Laura. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't even hold her for as long as a mother probably should. I just stood there watching her turn and walk back into the snow, telling myself she'd be back soon. In those first days, I lived in a state of waiting. I left Laura's bedroom untouched, afraid to disturb anything. I kept my phone close at all times, even when I was in the kitchen or out in the yard. The children stayed, quiet in a way that was almost unsettling. The older boy, Ethan, I remembered, tried hard to act strong. The younger one, Lily, startled awake from her sleep. I comforted them, cooked simple meals, told old stories I'd forgotten I even knew. A few weeks passed quickly. Then Christmas came. Laura called once, said things were not ready yet, and asked me to give her more time. I said okay, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. I hung 2 extra stockings by the fireplace and wrote the kids' names on them in red marker, as if they had always belonged there. Winter dragged on. Snow melted, then fell again. The kids started school near my house. My name appeared on school forms, first as grandmother, then simply as guardian. I signed without thinking much, knowing someone had to. Laura called less and less. Every call came with a different explanation, but always the same ending. "I'm not ready yet." I began adjusting my life without noticing. I stopped taking long morning walks because I had to make breakfast. I no longer finished the newspaper because I was interrupted by small questions. I stopped long phone calls with old friends because evenings were for homework. It all happened so naturally, like slipping back into a role I once knew well. Some nights when the house was quiet, I sat alone in the living room and wondered if I was doing the right thing. I wasn't angry at Laura. I didn't see myself as a martyr. I just felt a low, steady worry, like standing on a bridge without seeing either end. But then morning came. Ethan and Lily woke up, and those questions were pushed aside. Late one evening, while searching for spare batteries in Laura's old drawer, my hand touched something cold and solid. It was Laura's old phone, the kind no one uses anymore. The screen was dark, but when I pressed the button, a notification appeared. A draft message. Never sent. I stood there a long time, the phone in my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt that maybe I had missed something more important than simply staying. I put Laura's old phone back in the drawer, closing it very gently, as if even the smallest sound might shatter something fragile inside me. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the unsent message, but because I realized I had stopped waiting for a specific timeline. A few weeks had become a blurry idea, drifting somewhere between rushed breakfasts and exhausted evenings. My retirement income wasn't much. After paying the mortgage, utilities, and insurance, there was just enough left for one person living carefully. With 2 kids, I had to recalculate everything. I learned to shop seasonally, switch familiar brands for cheaper ones, cut back on small social outings I once enjoyed. I didn't feel like I was sacrificing. I was just managing, like any adult does when life quietly places another responsibility in their hands. My mornings started earlier. I woke Ethan and Lily, helped them into coats and scarves, and walked them to the bus stop in the biting cold. Some days, I watched the bus disappear down the snowy road and wondered where Laura was at that moment. But that question usually faded quickly, replaced by the mental list of things to do. Buy cold medicine for Lily, apply for reduced school fees, call the clinic. At school, I grew used to the curious looks. At my first parent meeting, I sat slightly off to the side as if I were only temporary. The teacher smiled kindly and called my name, but the line where the kid's mother's name should have been remained blank. I didn't correct it. I didn't explain. I just answered questions about grades, health, and the things that were immediate and concrete. At the clinic, the nurse called my name when it was our turn. "Relationship to the patient?" she asked, still typing. "Grandmother," I answered. After a while, the question disappeared. My name was automatically listed as the primary contact. I signed consent forms without my hands shaking like they had the first time. Everything changed gradually, without a single moment big enough to mark the shift. Midway through that school year, during a short after-hours meeting, Ethan's teacher looked at me, tilted her head slightly, and asked casually, "Where's their mother?" The question wasn't sharp or intrusive. It came out of habit. I was quiet for a few seconds, feeling my heartbeat slow. Then I said, evenly, "I'm here." The room paused for a brief moment, long enough for me to realize that the answer was both true and not entirely. Driving home that day, I thought a lot. I had never intended to take Laura's place. I never thought of myself as the kid's mother in the biological sense. But I couldn't deny that I had begun filling the space she left behind. And with that came a new worry. Was my presence quietly becoming an irreversible replacement? Children, I realized, don't ask who gave birth to them. They ask who stays when they need someone. I believed that. Believed presence mattered more than titles. But I also began to wonder, if Laura came back one day, what would my place in Ethan and Lily's lives be? And more importantly, was I doing something that made that return harder? Laura sent money sometimes, not regularly, not much. Never with an address or explanation. Sometimes it was enough to cover groceries for a week, sometimes just a few $dozen, like a reminder that she still remembered. I didn't ask questions. I didn't save envelopes or receipts as proof. I treated it as something private between Laura and me, not something to measure or balance. Some people suggested I contact family services to make things official. I listened, but chose silence. Not because I feared complications, but because I wasn't ready to name what was happening. Once you name something, you have to face its consequences. And at that time, I just wanted everything to keep moving, even if I didn't know where it was going. Time passed quietly. A few weeks turned into a few years without me noticing where the boundary had been crossed. I stayed in the same house, made coffee every morning, stood at the bus stop in winter cold. But deep inside, I began to understand that I had crossed an invisible line, not with one big decision, but with hundreds of small ones, each reasonable in its moment. That's when I realized some boundaries aren't marked by signs or paperwork. They only appear once you've gone too far to turn back. I didn't tell anyone I was tired, not because I wasn't, but because I didn't know how to say it properly. In a small town like this, people know each other through quick greetings on porches, polite questions at the post office or grocery store. "How are you, Maggie?" I always nodded, smiled, said things were fine. And in some ways, that wasn't entirely a lie. I still woke up each morning, cooked dinner, took the kids to school. But some afternoons, when I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight settle clearly on my shoulders. I hid that exhaustion out of habit. I didn't complain to neighbors or call old friends to vent. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would become something too big to ignore. And I wasn't ready for that. I just wanted to keep everything manageable, even though deep down I knew I was unsteady. At home, life slowed into a new rhythm. Ethan and Lily grew used to it. They knew where to leave their shoes, when to turn off the TV, which evenings I liked to read in my armchair. One night, while I was washing dishes, Lily ran into the kitchen, wrapped her arms around my legs from behind, and whispered, "Mom." I turned quickly, my heart pounding. I corrected her right away, almost by reflex. "Call me Grandma, sweetheart." Lily looked up, a little confused, then nodded and ran off like nothing had happened. But later, I stopped correcting them. Sometimes Ethan called me Mom when he needed help with homework. Sometimes Lily said it in the middle of the night after a nightmare. I heard it. I knew it. And I stayed silent. I told myself it was just a habit, that it didn't mean anything deeper. But each time, a feeling rose in me that was hard to name, warm and heavy at the same time. One evening, sitting alone in the living room after the kids were asleep, I blamed myself for not correcting it again. I wondered if my silence was a kind of quiet consent. I loved them, that I couldn't deny. But I was also afraid. Afraid I was going too far. Afraid that one day Laura would return and find something had changed beyond repair. And in that fear, there was guilt. Guilt because I knew I wasn't entirely innocent in this closeness. Laura still called, but rarely. The calls were short, her voice tired, as if she were speaking while doing something else. She asked about the kids' health, a few general questions about school. I answered just enough. When I waited for words like, "I'm coming back soon," or "I'm trying to arrange things," she always changed the subject or ended the call with a rushed excuse. I didn't push. I didn't ask about money or dates. I didn't want to be pressure, and I didn't want to hear promises she might not even believe herself. Sometimes, after hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time, wondering if my silence was another form of avoidance. Then I reminded myself that everyone moves at their own pace, and some questions asked too early only make things messier. I started writing in an old notebook with a worn cover, bought from a discount store. I didn't write every day. Sometimes weeks passed without a word, sometimes just a few lines before bed. I didn't write to accuse anyone or catalog Laura's absences. I wrote to understand myself, to name feelings I didn't have time to face during the day. In those pages, I admitted to myself that I loved Ethan and Lily deeply, but with fear woven through that love. I wrote about small moments that made me feel more like a mother than a grandmother, and I wrote about the quiet worry that if I wasn't careful, that love could turn into a kind of replacement I never consciously chose. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows and the house made the familiar sounds of age, I sat on my bed with the notebook on my lap and wondered whether I was doing the right thing, or just the easiest thing. I didn't have a clear answer. I only knew that the next morning I would wake up early, make breakfast, and see the kids out the door. And in that routine, I slowly realized there were things I didn't tell anyone, not because they weren't important, but because I wasn't brave enough to face them yet. Everything shifted on a morning that seemed ordinary. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was the school. The secretary's voice was a little rushed, trying to stay calm but clearly worried. Ethan had slipped during recess and scraped his knee. It wasn't serious, but he needed to be checked in the nurse's office. I dropped the clothes, grabbed my coat, and drove over, repeating one simple thought. It's just a small thing. At school, Ethan sat on the exam table, paler than usual, but smiling when he saw me. Lily stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. I bent down, checked the scrape, feeling both relieved and tense. The nurse handed me a stack of forms and said she needed my signature to authorize an X-ray, just in case. I took the pen, skimmed the familiar lines, then stopped at a blank space at the bottom. "Who are you on the record?" the nurse asked gently, clearly. The question froze me. I looked at the paper, then at her waiting face. In that brief moment, all the years collapsed into a single point. Grandmother. Temporary caregiver, or simply the one who was there. I opened my mouth, ready to answer like always, but the words caught. I thought of Laura, not being there. I thought of Ethan, wincing in pain. "I'm the responsible one," I said, my voice low and slow, as if weighing each word. The nurse nodded and didn't ask anything else. She turned away to process the paperwork, leaving me with the pen and a strange sensation spreading through my body. I signed my name on the final line, my hand slightly shaking, the ink uneven. It was the first time I'd said those words out loud, and I knew, even if no one else heard, it had changed something. We went home that afternoon after the doctor confirmed it was only a minor injury. Ethan's knee was carefully bandaged. Lily was given a small candy to calm her. On the drive back, I drove slower than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was so thick I could hear my own breathing. At home, I helped Ethan into bed and made Lily a warm glass of milk. When everything settled, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the sink. My hands were trembling. Not violently, but enough for me to realize I wasn't as composed as I'd been at school. I looked at myself in the mirror, more gray in my hair than I remembered, tired eyes still trying to look steady. I wondered when I had become ready to say, I'm responsible, in my daughter's place, and whether it was a step I'd never be able to undo. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room with only the soft yellow light of a table lamp. I opened the drawer where I kept Laura's old papers, originally looking for health insurance information. My hand brushed against a thin stack I hadn't touched in years. Among old bills and junk mail was a set of printed pages, the corners yellowed. It was an email, not one I'd received, but a printed draft with an unfinished subject line. I recognized Laura's writing immediately, short, broken sentences, as if she'd been thinking while typing. The message stopped midway, no greeting, no signature. She wrote about feeling overwhelmed, about being afraid she wasn't good enough to come back, about believing the kids would be better off staying with me. Then it ended abruptly, as if she'd deleted the urge to hit send. I held the pages for a long time without reading them all, just staring at the opening lines. In the quiet room, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know when Laura had written that email or why she'd printed it and left it behind. I only knew that maybe all these years I'd been seeing everything from too narrow an angle. I folded the paper, set it on the table, and sat there in silence. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches, making that familiar winter sound. I realized that what I said that morning at school wasn't just a temporary answer. It was a sign that I had reached a crossroads I'd never prepared for. And in my hands right now was an old piece of Laura, never sent, but enough to make me understand this story was far more complicated than simply who stayed and who left. I read that email slowly, one line at a time, as if the words might disappear if I went too fast. Laura didn't write anything specific about dates or plans. There was no, I'll be back in the spring, and there was no, I need 6 more months. Just short, scattered sentences about exhaustion. She wrote that every morning she woke up feeling out of breath, that the thought of coming back made her hands shake so badly she couldn't even type, that she was afraid of my eyes, afraid of the neighbors' questions, afraid of having to explain why she hadn't been able to do what everyone thought was obvious. The email stopped there, with no closing, like a breath cut off mid-inhale. I folded the paper and opened it again, trying to find some sign of calculation or selfishness, but there wasn't any. Only an exhaustion spreading through everything, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't need a clear reason. And in that moment, I realized what I hadn't dared to think for years. Laura hadn't disappeared from our lives. She was hiding from herself, hiding from expectations that maybe even I had accidentally put on her shoulders. Realizing that didn't make me feel lighter right away. It made everything more complicated. Because if Laura wasn't someone who left cleanly and for good, then I had stayed with those 2 children in a murky gap, one where no one was completely right and no one was completely wrong. I sat with that email in my hands for a long time, watching the lamplight fall across the old wooden table, and I wondered how much of my daughter I had truly understood through all the years of being her mother. Some people leave not out of malice, but because they can't stand themselves. That thought came to me gently, not dramatic, but enough to make me stop. I wondered whether forgiveness needs an apology, or if sometimes forgiveness is simply accepting that the other person didn't have enough strength to stay, even if they wanted to. I also understood that my memory, like any memory, may have been worn down and rearranged by personal feeling. The story I was telling myself wasn't the full truth for everyone involved. I couldn't, and didn't want to, assign motives to Laura. I only knew how it felt to me, how I looked back at scattered pieces through the lens of someone who has lived long enough to know that things are rarely just one-sided. After that night, I didn't change my life suddenly. I still woke up early, still made breakfast, still took Ethan and Lily to school, but a new question began forming in my mind. Where is my boundary? Not the boundary between me and Laura, but the boundary between caring and replacing. I loved those two children, and I had no intention of leaving them, but I also didn't want to erase their mother's place by accident, even if that place was empty and fragile. I started thinking about more practical things I had deliberately avoided before, not by looking for a lawyer or filing paperwork, but by trying to understand what I could do to protect the kids while not slamming Laura's door shut. Those thoughts made me tired, but it was a different kind of tired, like sore muscles after you've pushed them too long. Instead of turning to legal processes, I went to a counselor in the next town over. She was a few years older than me, her voice low and unhurried, not quick to offer advice. I told her, not everything, but enough for her to understand the situation. I told her about the unsent email, about the guilt of being called Mom, about the fear that one day everything would collapse because I'd been standing in the wrong place. She listened, nodded, and asked me just one question. What do you want to protect most? That question stayed with me the entire drive home. I realized I didn't only want to protect the kids from instability. I also wanted to protect myself from becoming someone I never intended to become. And somewhere deep down, I also wanted to protect Laura from the feeling that she had lost everything just because she wasn't strong enough at the right moment. I put the email back in the drawer, but I no longer saw it as a heavy secret. It became a reminder that this story wasn't as simple as I once believed. I kept raising the kids, but I started paying closer attention to small signs, to questions I needed to answer more honestly, even when the answers weren't clear yet. Outside the window, winter slowly gave way to longer days. The snow melted, revealing damp ground and the first tiny buds. I knew I was entering a different stage, one where I couldn't rely only on routine and silence, but at least this time, I didn't feel like I was walking in complete darkness. Time never warns you before it decides to speed up. One day, I realized Ethan was nearly half a head taller than me, his voice noticeably deeper whenever he called down from upstairs. Lily no longer trotted along behind me. She started closing her bedroom door and playing music loud enough for me to hear, but not understand. Their teen years arrived quietly, without any single moment marking the change. It came in small shifts that added up into a distance I had to learn to accept. They knew I wasn't their biological mother. I never lied about that. From the beginning, I called Laura their mother, even as that name grew faint in everyday conversations. As he got older, Ethan started asking more, not in accusation, but with the curiosity of a child trying to piece his life together. I answered what I knew, without embellishing, without guessing. Lily listened more than she asked. Sometimes her eyes rested on me for a long time, as if weighing something she wasn't ready to say. One evening after dinner, Ethan stayed in the kitchen while I was washing dishes. He leaned against the counter, quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "You didn't give birth to me, but you never left me." He didn't raise his voice. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded like a conclusion he'd been thinking about for a long time. I stood with my back to him, my hands still in warm water, feeling my chest tighten. I didn't turn around, and I didn't answer. I just kept washing the last plate, dried my hands, and pulled out a pan to make dinner like I did every day. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was afraid my voice would shake if I spoke. Some sentences once said, "Stay with you for a long time." I needed time to place it where it belonged in my heart instead of reacting immediately. Ethan didn't repeat it. He went upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the smell of onions and hot oil gently sizzling on the stove. Laura was completely silent during those years. No calls, no texts, no money sent. That silence was different from earlier gaps. It was thicker, more sealed, like a door closed carefully and fully. I didn't know where she was or how she was living. Sometimes I thought about trying to find out, asking someone to check, but I stopped myself. I had learned that some doors, if you knock too hard, only hurt both sides. I started thinking more about Ethan and Lily's future, not the specific kind, what school, what career, but their emotional future. I wondered what would happen when I no longer had the strength to be here every day. I didn't start legal paperwork or draw up documents. I just prepared myself, and I prepared them in the ways I knew. I taught Ethan how to manage allowance money, not through long lectures, but by letting him make small mistakes. I taught Lily how to cook a few simple meals, not because she would have to fend for herself soon, but because I wanted her to know she could. I talked to them about leaving home, about the mix of excitement and fear when you step into the world. I didn't say I would always be here. I only said that wherever they went, they would always have the right to come back, even if one day I wasn't in this house anymore. On quiet evenings, when the kids were in their own corners with their own worlds, I sat in the living room reading or knitting. I thought of Laura, not with anger anymore, not with blame, but with a sadness that had softened. I wondered whether she knew how much her children had grown, what they had said, who they were becoming. But I didn't write a letter or leave a message. I didn't want to disturb a silence that Laura might need just to keep going. Sometimes, rarely, I felt like I was standing between two shores. On one side was the responsibility I'd carried for years. On the other was the truth that I couldn't keep everything intact forever. I reminded myself that everything would have to change, whether I was ready or not. Change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's simply a different shape of continuing. Late one night, I turned off the kitchen light and stood there, looking at the house in the dark. I could see the marks of time, scuffs on the walls, a chair with a loose screw, an entry rug worn thin. I could also see what couldn't be seen, attachment, words that were never answered, roles that shifted without anyone declaring them. I knew I couldn't control the future, and I couldn't fix the past. The only thing I could do was be here one more day, with a clearer awareness of my own boundaries. And with that awareness, I began to accept that what I'd called stability all those years was really just a pause before everything moved into another stage. I didn't know what that stage would look like. I only knew that when it came, I wouldn't be as shocked as before. The call came late in the afternoon while I was folding a blanket on the sofa. The last sunlight angled through the window, making dust float visibly in the air. The number on the screen wasn't saved, an unfamiliar string of digits that made me hesitate for a couple of beats before picking up. I had gotten so used to expecting nothing from this phone that the ringing sounded like it belonged to someone else's life. "Hello?" I said, my voice so normal it surprised even me. On the other end, there was a brief silence. Then Laura's voice came through. Not loud, not shaky, not like the Laura from 16 years ago. It was lower, slower, as if it had passed through many layers of exhaustion. "Mom, it's me." 2 words, but enough to make me grip the edge of the table. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she had been wrong. She didn't complain or blame anyone. She only said she wanted to talk. That word choice threw me. Talk about what, after all those years of silence? I didn't ask right away. I let Laura continue, let the rhythm of the call find its footing. "I think it's time. I should talk to you," Laura said, like she was reading a sentence she'd rehearsed many times. I could hear a familiar hesitation in her voice, the same hesitation I used to hear when she was about to say something hard. Then, without warning, Laura said something that tightened my chest. "You've done more than your part, Mom." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply a statement laid down gently, but it felt heavy as stone. I didn't react right away. I looked out the window at the grass turning pale yellow and felt my deepest fear being touched. For years, I had asked myself whether I was doing too much, whether my steady presence had accidentally pushed Laura farther away. Hearing her say it herself, even as just one sentence, knocked me off balance for a moment. But at the same time, I realized her voice didn't carry resentment. It sounded like someone trying to set a boundary without being sure where that boundary truly was. Laura kept talking, a little faster now, as if afraid I would cut her off. She said she wasn't calling to take the kids, not calling for money, not calling to change what existed. "I just want to connect," she said. The word connect sounded strange, almost like it didn't belong to us. I wondered if she even knew what she was asking for, or if she was reaching for a safe word to cover something unsteady. I listened, but my thoughts tangled. I had gotten used to having a clear villain to face. Absence, silence, years without explanation. But now, there was no obvious bad person. No one for me to be angry at. No one for me to condemn. Just a daughter who had grown up in ways I hadn't witnessed, standing on the other end of the call, trying to open a door she herself had closed long ago. Laura didn't say much about Ethan and Lily. She asked briefly, like she was afraid to go too deep. I answered just enough. No more, no less, no boasting, no hiding. I realized I was keeping distance, not because I was angry, but because I needed to understand where I stood in this story. There was a long silence between us. I could hear Laura's breathing, steady but heavy. I knew she was waiting for me to say something, maybe reassurance, maybe pushback, but I couldn't answer right away, not because I had nothing to say, but because any answer might send everything down a path I wasn't ready to accept. "You don't have to answer me right now," Laura said, her voice softer. "I just wanted you to know." The words made my throat go dry. I nodded by reflex, then realized she couldn't see it. "I heard you," I said slowly. That was all I could say in that moment, and I knew it was true. Before hanging up, Laura took a deep breath. "If you're okay with it," she said, "we could meet in person." The last two words were barely spoken, as if she was afraid they would disappear if she said them out loud. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the familiar room where every object belonged to a life Laura no longer fit into. I could feel hesitation pulling me in two directions. "Let me think about it," I said at last. Not a no, not a yes. Laura was quiet for a second, then said she understood. The call ended gently. No sigh, no promises. I set the phone down, my hands still a little shaky. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, steady and emotionless. I knew that from this moment, everything had started moving in a different way. And even though I hadn't answered, Laura's request to meet in person hung in the air like a question with no period. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near the highway, a place where people stopped more than they stayed. I arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table by the window, and ordered a hot tea, even though it wasn't cold outside. When Laura walked in, I recognized her immediately, but it still took a beat to match the face in front of me with my old memories. She looked tired. Not so thin it was alarming, not like someone freshly broken by tragedy. Just tired. The tiredness of someone who's been walking too long without ever stopping long enough to rest. She looked around, saw me, and paused. We both stood up almost at the same time, but we didn't hug. Just a small nod, like two people who have known each other a long time, but aren't sure whether to be close or distant. Laura sat down, slid her purse under the chair, and wrapped both hands around the cup of coffee she'd just ordered. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly, as if she was trying to keep herself steady. We started with simple opening lines. The weather, the drive, when this place had changed owners. No one mentioned 16 years right away, and I knew it wasn't avoidance so much as two people unsure how to enter a big story through a small door. Laura was the one who broke the silence. "I never thought you'd stay that long." She said it plainly, without accusation or dramatic surprise. but it felt like someone gently tapped on a door that had been shut tight inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't confirm. I just looked at her and realized there was both acknowledgement and helplessness in that sentence. In that moment, I understood that neither of us had been prepared for this. Laura hadn't been prepared to leave the kids for so long. I hadn't been prepared to be the one who stayed for that long. We had stepped into a wordless agreement, each carrying our own assumptions, and then we let time do what it does. Laura described the years in an even voice, jobs changing constantly, temporary places to live, relationships that came and went, nothing big enough to make me gasp, nothing tragic enough to explain everything, just a chain of days, one after another, not exactly failure, not exactly success either. I listened without interrupting, without trying to force cause and effect into order. When it was my turn, I did the same. I talked about Ethan and Lily, but not too much. I talked about them growing up, about ordinary changes. I didn't mention sleepless nights or the times I blamed myself, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want this meeting to become a balance sheet of merit and fault. There was a moment when Laura stopped and looked straight at me, her eyes not turning away. Suddenly, I realized she was waiting for something decisive. Maybe forgiveness, maybe a late-coming accusation. But I didn't give her either. I just sat there, feeling my daughter's presence after all those years, and let that feeling find its own place. Staying is a choice, not an instinct. That thought became very clear in me. I had chosen to stay day after day, not because I couldn't leave, but because on each of those days, staying made the most sense. But if someone comes back late, what rights do they still have? The right to be called mom? The right to step into the lives of children who grew up without them? I didn't have an answer, and I wasn't sure an answer even existed. We didn't make any agreement. We didn't promise anything about the future. There were no tears. Laura didn't apologize, and I didn't demand one. Maybe because we both understood that some apologies, when they come too late, only make everything heavier. We ended the meeting with a light handshake, like two people who had said enough for today. On the way home, I drove slower than usual. The familiar road stretched ahead, but I felt like I was moving through it in a different state. Not relief, not pain, just emptiness, like a room had been cleared out, but nothing had been put back yet. When I opened the door and stepped inside, I paused at the threshold. The house was quiet, smelling of old wood and familiar soap. I realized that meeting hadn't closed anything, but it had opened a new space inside me. A space with no noise, no climax, only the truth that this story had moved into another chapter. And even though I didn't know where that chapter would lead, I knew I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. I didn't tell Ethan and Lily right after the meeting. I needed a few days for my feelings to settle, to make sure that when I opened my mouth, I wasn't speaking from my own confusion. One evening, after dinner, when the dishes were put away and the kitchen had returned to its familiar quiet, I asked them to sit down at the table. Not with a serious tone, and not like I was preparing some big announcement. I just said I wanted to talk, and they nodded, each in their own way. I told them about meeting their mother. No embellishing, no softening, no exaggerating. I said that Laura wanted to reconnect, that she hadn't made any demands, and that everything was still open. I stopped there and let the words find their own way. I didn't tell them what they should do. I didn't suggest any path is right. I only said this was their story, and they had the right to feel it in their own way. Ethan reacted first. He stayed quiet for a long time, staring down at the tabletop, his fingers lightly tapping the wood edge like he was counting time. Then he looked up and asked a blunt question. "What do you want us to do?" That question, even though it was short, held all the hesitation of someone standing at a crossroads. I looked him straight in the eye and answered slowly, making sure I wasn't accidentally steering him. "I don't need to be chosen," I said. "I just need you to be yourselves." The words hung in the quiet kitchen. No raised voice, no martyrdom in them. It was simply the truth it had taken me years to name. Lily was different. She didn't say anything right away. She looked at me, then at her brother, then out the window as if she were searching for something to hold on to. Finally, Lily asked softly, "If we want to see Mom, will you be sad?" The question touched a very tender place in me. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know, but because I needed to be sure my answer wouldn't put more weight on her shoulders. "I might be sad," I said honestly, "but that's my feeling, not your responsibility." I watched Lily exhale in relief, as if she'd just been allowed to admit something she'd been carrying for a long time. In the days that followed, their reactions stayed different. Ethan grew quieter, spending more time in his room, listening to music and thinking. Lily asked more, small questions that went straight to the core: what their mother liked, what she used to be like, why things had turned out this way. I answered as best I could, always stopping at the boundary of guessing. I didn't want to speak for Laura, and I didn't want to paint a picture I wasn't even sure about myself. I learned how to step back, both literally and in the way it mattered. I didn't stand outside their door when they were on the phone. I didn't ask after every conversation what they'd said. I let silence have its place. That wasn't easy. Sometimes instinct pulled me forward, wanting to protect, wanting to control. But I reminded myself that love isn't always about being the closest one. No one won in those conversations. No one lost either. There was no neat closure, no shared decision made in a single evening, just overlapping thoughts, feelings not yet named. And I slowly understood that uncertainty isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's the space each person needs to find their own rhythm. One night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the living room and looked around at the familiar things. I could see traces of different seasons layered on top of each other. The years when it was only me, the years with children's laughter added in, and now this stage where everything was beginning to shift. I didn't know how it would end. I didn't know whether today's choices would pull us closer together or push us farther apart. But I knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to write a script for anyone. I wasn't trying to make this story right by some standard. I was just standing here, ready to receive whatever came, whatever shape it took. And in that acceptance, I felt a strange kind of relief, like I'd just set down a burden I'd always believed I could never put down. I knew we were getting close to a point where things would have to change more clearly. Not right now, but soon. And when that time came, I wanted to have enough calm to neither cling nor push away, just to be there, at the right time, in the right role. The decision didn't arrive in a single day, and it wasn't spoken in one sentence. It formed slowly, through long evenings, through the times Ethan stayed quiet longer than usual, through Lily's eyes whenever she looked at her brother. I didn't ask either of them first. I waited until they spoke on their own, because I had promised myself I wouldn't place more pressure on either one. Ethan was the one who spoke. One afternoon, he stood at the edge of the living room doorway, his hands in his jacket pockets, like he was about to step outside even though it wasn't dark yet. "Grandma," he said, his voice low and steady, "I want to try living with Mom for a while." I looked at him for a long time. There was no impulse in his words, no challenge, just a desire to try, to know, to experience for himself the part of life he'd been missing. Lily didn't say anything right then. She sat in her chair, gripping the hem of her shirt, her eyes fixed on the floor. I turned to her, not asking, "Are you going?" but asking, "How do you feel?" Lily looked up, her eyes wet but her voice very clear. "I want to stay." No explanation, just stay. In that moment, I felt something inside me split in two. One half wanted to keep Ethan here, wanted to say he didn't have to go anywhere to understand where he belonged. The other half understood that if I stopped him, I would only repeat another cycle. It hurt in a very quiet way, but I didn't stop him. I didn't argue, I only nodded. "I'm not holding you," I said to Ethan slowly, letting each word settle. "I'm just opening the door." I saw his shoulders loosen a little, like he'd just been given permission to breathe. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes wavering but not accusing. I placed my hand over hers, felt that familiar warmth, and knew the three of us were stepping into a hard season. Laura didn't promise anything. When I called her to tell her about Ethan's decision, Laura only said she understood. No, everything will be okay. No, don't worry, Mom. Just understood. I didn't know what that meant in real life, but I didn't ask for more. I'd learned that some promises only soothe you for a moment, then leave behind empty spaces that are hard to fill. On the day Ethan left, I helped him pack. Not much. Clothes, a few books, an old pair of headphones. We worked in silence, not because of tension, but because no one wanted to say something too big in a small room. When Laura came to pick him up, we stood on the front porch. Ethan hugged Lily very tightly, longer than I expected. Lily cried, but she didn't cling to her brother's shirt. She stood straight, like she'd decided she wouldn't make things harder. Ethan hugged me last. "I'll call," he said. I nodded and didn't add any warnings or advice. I knew if I started, I wouldn't know where to stop. When the car pulled away, I watched until it disappeared at the end of the road. Then I went inside, closed the door, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt quiet in a different way. The emptiness showed up fast, not because there was less noise, but because a familiar rhythm was missing. A mug no one used anymore, a pair of shoes no longer in the corner by the door. Lily and I adjusted our routine slowly, like two people learning how to live in a space that had changed shape. I learned to accept that this family no longer had its old form, and maybe never would again. Some evenings, after Lily had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room and listened to the wind outside the window. I didn't blame myself, and I didn't comfort myself either. I just let the emptiness exist, without trying to fill it. I understood that emptiness was the price of not clinging, and I accepted paying it. One morning, a few weeks later, I opened the mailbox out front like I always did. Between bills and junk mail, there was a cream-colored envelope, handwriting that felt familiar, but I had to look twice to recognize. My name was written neatly and slowly, as if the writer had weighed every stroke. I stood on the porch for a long time with the envelope in my hand, not opening it right away. I knew that whatever was inside, it would force me to take one more step into this story. And this time, I wasn't sure whether I was ready. I opened the letter in the afternoon, while Lily was still at school, and the house was so quiet I could hear the paper softly rustling in my hands. The envelope wasn't sealed with glue, just carefully folded shut. Inside were a few handwritten pages in Laura's writing, no longer as rushed as I remembered, but still with the familiar rhythm of someone who often pauses mid-sentence to think. There was no apology at the start. No, "Mom, I was wrong," and no words trying to smooth things over. Laura began by admitting her own weakness. She wrote that there had been days she woke up without the strength to even name herself, days when every choice felt heavy as stone. She wrote about the fear of coming back and discovering that everyone was better off without her, a fear that makes someone want to return and disappear at the same time. She didn't blame me, and she didn't blame circumstances. She only wrote that, at certain times, she hadn't been strong enough to do what needed to be done. I read slowly, not because the handwriting was hard, but because I wanted each sentence to have time to settle. In some parts, Laura admitted she had leaned on me, staying like a life preserver, without having the courage to ask how long that life preserver could hold. In other parts, she wrote that when she heard me say, "I'm just opening the door," she understood that some doors can't be pulled toward yourself forever. She wrote that she didn't know where the future would go, but she knew she no longer wanted to hide in silence. There were no promises in the letter, no concrete plan, no clear proposal to rebuild anything, only an admission that she had been weak, afraid, and had chosen to retreat instead of face things. And maybe, for Laura, being able to write that down was already a long distance from 16 years ago. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and sat still. In that moment, I realized I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the relief I'd imagined either, just a different kind of quiet, deeper, with fewer sharp edges. I knew some people need an apology to move forward. I also knew that for some, when an apology comes too late, it can't do what everyone hopes it will. For me, this letter didn't close anything. It only placed another piece of truth on the table. I didn't write back, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to turn Laura's admission into an exchange. I was afraid that if I wrote, I'd accidentally place another burden on her, a burden to respond, to promise, to repair. I chose silence not to punish her, but to give what had just been said room to breathe. I also reminded myself that my memory, what I remember, what I feel, may have been rearranged by the years. The story I tell myself is how I look back, not a sentence handed down to anyone. I wasn't certain enough to judge Laura's motives, and I didn't want to trap the past inside neat conclusions. I only knew how I had lived, and the choices I had made within what I was able to do. I put the letter in the drawer, tucked beneath old papers and my worn journal. I didn't lock it away. I didn't hide it. I just stored it there, like something that exists alongside my present life, not something that has to be mentioned every day. Life went on in small rhythms. Lily and I slowly got used to a house with fewer people in it, quieter dinners, slower mornings. I was getting older. That couldn't be denied. But with age, I felt lighter. Not because there was less to do, but because I tried less to control what was never truly mine to control. I learned to let unanswered questions stay where they were, without forcing them to answer right away. Some evenings I sat reading, yellow lamplight falling across the page, and I thought about Laura not with the urge to fix anything, but with a gentle curiosity. What kind of person she might become when she stopped running. I thought about Ethan, about the road he was trying out, and I thought about Lily, who chose to stay but wasn't required to stand still. I realized that this family, even without its old shape, still existed, imperfect but real. When I closed the drawer, I didn't know how this story would end. Maybe there would be more meetings, maybe there wouldn't. Maybe one day I'd write back, or maybe that letter would sit there for a very long time. What I knew for sure was that I no longer needed a clear conclusion in order to keep living. And maybe it was that uncertainty that brought me closer to what I'd been searching for years. A peace that doesn't come from everything being resolved, but from accepting things as they are. I returned the key on a quiet morning when the sun hadn't yet warmed the front step. Laura stood in the doorway holding a cup of cold coffee, looking at me like she was waiting for an opening line. I didn't have one. I just placed the key into her palm and slowly closed her fingers around it. No promises, no conditions, no instructions for the future, just returning something that had once been handed over at a time when we both believed it was temporary. Laura didn't ask why. She nodded lightly as if she understood some decisions don't need explaining. We stood there for a few more seconds, then I turned away. I didn't look back. Not out of coldness, but because I'd learned that in some moments, if you look 1 second longer, you'll want to hold on to more than you should. After that, time moved in a very different rhythm. Ethan visited often. He grew fast, bringing new stories, new questions that no longer searched for permission. We talked like people who know each other well, not to make up for anything, but to stay current with each other. Lily was different. She called, stopped by sometimes, but not regularly. There were long gaps, and I respected them. I understood that everyone keeps connection in their own way, some through presence, some through just enough distance. I lived alone again, not for the first time, but for the first time with a different feeling. The house no longer had to adjust to school schedules, early dinners, or late-night conversations. I rearranged things, not to erase traces, but to make room for the present. Some mornings, I made coffee for one, sat watching sunlight slide across the wooden floor, and realized I wasn't as empty as I'd once feared. I felt full in a quiet way. Our story wasn't complete. It didn't end with a family reunion meal or a promise kept perfectly, but it was real. Real in the way ordinary life usually is, with gaps, things left unsaid, and decisions without a soundtrack. I learned that family isn't about holding tight, but about knowing when to let go. Letting go isn't because the love is gone, but because you love in a way that doesn't leave someone gasping for air. Love doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't promise a gentle ending, but without it, everything is surely hollow. Between those two truths, I chose love with boundaries, a choice that isn't easy but necessary. I also want to say this clearly in the steady voice of someone who has lived long enough to know she can be wrong. The story you've just heard is fictional, pieced together and edited from many slices of real life and human experience, told through my memory and personal interpretation. It isn't meant to confirm objective events. It doesn't represent absolute right and wrong. It doesn't assign motives, and it doesn't encourage anyone to copy what's done here. I'm telling it to reflect, not to judge. If, in real life, you're in a similar situation, pulled between love and boundaries, seek guidance, talk early with the people involved, and set clear boundaries. Slow, kind conversations often save more than rushed decisions. Before I end, I want to thank you for staying with me this far. If you're listening from some city out there, leave me a comment and tell me where you're from. If you've walked through fragile family boundaries, held on, let go, or are learning how to do both, share your experience. Tap like if this story touched you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss other everyday stories, slow, thoughtful, and not quick to conclude. Thank you for listening. Somewhere, maybe very close, I think we're all learning the same lesson, knowing when to hold the key and when to give it back.